Welcome to the Starlight Pet Talk podcast, where we'll talk about and explore ways to help pet parents and future pet parents learn everything they need to know to have a happy and healthy relationship with their pet. So sit up and stay for Starlight Pet Talk, rescue, adoption, and pet parenting done right.
If you're a fan of Starlight Pet Talk, you'll love our new line of merchandise. We have t-shirts, hoodies, and more, all featuring your favorite podcast logos and designs. Plus, we're offering a limited number of Starlight Outreaching rescue items where a portion of the proceeds go directly to animal rescue. Our merchandise is the perfect way to show your support for your favorite pet podcast and animal rescue at the same time. So what are you waiting for? Just visit our website at www.starlightpettalk.com to order your merchandise today. Welcome to Starlight Pet Talk. I'm your host, Amy Castro. And, as we humans have continued to kind of grow our cities and towns and expand our territories, the unfortunate effect of that is that we are encroaching and oftentimes destroying the natural habitats of our beloved, or at least my beloved, wildlife. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with this podcast episode is to talk about how we can do the right thing by our wildlife friends and coexist in a way that is good for all of us along the way. So what I decided to do, of course, as you all have met in the first episode of the podcast, my best friend, Bev. Bev, you want to stick your head in on the video, Bev? Say hi, Bev. My best friend, Bev, volunteers at this awesome place in Cape Cod where she lives called Wild Care of Cape Cod. And so I asked her if she would be so kind as to ask the director, Stephanie Ellis, to be a guest on the show. So Stephanie is joining us here today to tell us some of the do's and don'ts and how we can do the right thing by our wildlife companions. So Stephanie, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited.
I definitely appreciate you being here. I think that people, they want to do the right thing, but they don't necessarily know what to do. So what I wanted to start off talking about was, what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to just generally living amongst wildlife?
Sure. So when people find wildlife, for example, when people find turtles crossing the road, one of the biggest mistakes is that they move it to a new location. And so you might have a situation where eastern box turtles, for example, they are a species of special concern here, and they are not an aquatic turtle. So if they see a box turtle on the road and then move it to the water, that's not appropriate habitat. So the kindest thing they can do and should do there is just to help the turtle to cross the road to the other side it was headed.
Okay.
So that's one nice thing that we can do for turtles. Also, we see a lot of people who unfortunately use rodenticides, which is the mouse and rat poison, which can cause secondary poisoning to wildlife. Also, glue traps are harmful to wildlife. And there are many, many alternatives, humane and environmentally safe alternatives. Another thing we see a lot, and I know that people mean well, it comes from a good place, but when people find baby birds, baby squirrels, they tend to feed them or give them water. And that is not a good thing to do, because if the babies if they're hypothermic, they're not going to be able to to process the water, or if they have internal or external injuries and they can't process food, that can actually cause more harm than good. So I know that people feel like they're being kind, but if you find a baby animal, the kindest thing you can do is get it warm, keep it warm, quiet, and contact a local wildlife rehabilitator.
Yeah, and that's something I know down in Texas that we run into that a lot is, people are, it's a baby and they want to do the right thing and they see them as being so vulnerable. Many times people will say to me, well, I haven't seen the mom, or I haven't seen any other birds around, so it must be abandoned. Is that necessarily true?
Not in all cases, no. I'm so glad that you asked that. In the case of baby birds, if they're well feathered and they're bright and alert and the parents are around feeding them, that would be likely a fledgling bird. And all species are different, but most songbirds, they're on the ground before they can actually fly, except for birds like swifts and swallows, really truly aerial birds that eat all of their meals on the wing. They don't leave the nest until they can fly.
Okay.
And so, but most birds, like your robins and your grackles, they leave the nest and they're well feathered. They're huge. Sometimes they're bigger than the parents, but they can't fly yet, and that's normal.
Okay.
So what we do is when people call, we ask them, please watch. Is it bright and alert? Are the parents nearby feeding it? Can you keep your dog and cat in, for the next few days?
That's the tricky part, is especially down by us. It's not even about keeping your own personal pets in. It's the neighborhood cats that people are always super worried about. And I kind of never, well, first of all, I always tell them to call wildlife rehab, but it's like, well, what if a cat gets it? I don't know what to say. I don't know what to tell them.
I know. It's so hard. And we certainly have those challenges here. And then sometimes people just feel like, oh my God, I have to do something, that the parents are here, but this poor helpless baby. And so we'll say, if we think it's appropriate, it's a fledgling.
Mm-hmm.
We'll say, put gloves on and put it in a low bush for the night. So at least it's up off the ground and has a little bit of a chance. But most of the time, we ask people to send photos because we'll often know right away. Mm-hmm. And of course, if it has wounds or it's been in your cat's mouth, we're going to want you to bring the animal to us.
Right.
And then baby rabbits are a great example.
Oh, we get a lot of those too. For sure.
Because we have Eastern cottontails here, and the mother is never at the nest. She nurses the young, usually twice a night, so at dusk and dawn. So people find a nest in the backyard, which is basically like a little scrape in the vegetation with some fur and some dried grass. And they see these babies and say, oh my God, there's no mom. And so what we do is we tell people, cover it back up, take some string or some yarn and make like a tic-tac-toe or a crisscross pattern, lay that over the nest, check in the morning, and then leave them alone, and then check in the morning. And if that pattern has been moved, then we know that mom was there to nurse them.
Ooh.
And if that crisscross or tic-tac-toe pattern hasn't moved, then they might be in need of help. But of course, if the dog has been handling them.
I had that happen one time.
Yeah.
Dogs. Not good.
Dogs love baby rabbits, and rabbits nest all around us.
This one that my Doberman found, unfortunately, was right in the middle of the yard, like literally in the middle of the backyard that had been mowed fairly recently. It's like, how did that happen?
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because a lot of the rabbit babies that we get, the orphans, they're from dog yards. The nests were in the dog yard. So we're actually thinking that is significant. Perhaps the rabbits nest where dogs are because dogs keep out large predators.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, really.
That's interesting.
Except then the dog often becomes the predator. So the number one reasons we get baby rabbits is dog attack, cat attack, and then sadly lawnmower and weed whackers. So
I've had kittens like that even.
Have you really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That usually it's in bushes where somebody's kind of doing the edging of the landscaping. But yeah, I don't know if you remember, Bev, years ago, but and it was too little to be stitched or anesthetized. So the poor little thing was like super glued together, but he survived.
Oh my goodness.
He made it. He had some little scars, but
it
must have hurt.
I'm sure.
He made it.
So we usually ask people before you mow to check for nests. And also, before you set your brush piles on fire, please dismantle them and look for babies. We get a lot of brush pile babies that have been burned every year.
Oh, wow.
Well, not a lot, but enough
that you don't want it to happen.
It's a thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, because we do a lot of burning down where I am as well. That actually makes me wonder as far as like trees. It's the type of, well, it's probably a little late now, but maybe not for you here on the East Coast, to be trimming trees, cutting trees, getting rid of branches, things like that. What should people watch out for there?
Yes. So
critters.
Right, that is such a great question. Right now, it's like the worst time to be cutting down trees because everything's nesting. All of our songbirds, we still have squirrels nesting. And so we usually tell people to reserve their tree felling and trimming until the late fall and winter, which I know those aren't the times that people want to be outdoors doing it, but those are the safest times for wildlife. So right now, if you must fell a tree or trim trees and bushes, check for nests. If there are any hollows in the tree, check for nests, woodpecker activity, screech owl activity, things like that. And those are simple things that people can do that just takes a little bit of time, and you could save lives.
Right. So. And I can't imagine. I've never had this happen to me, but I can't imagine after you've already done what you've done, and then to discover it, it's like, be sure to look for it first. And sometimes people just, they're not thinking about it. They're just thinking, hey, this is just some tree in my yard. I want to trim some branches. And
exactly.
Next thing you know, you've knocked somebody out of his home, which is not cool or not fun.
Totally.
For sure. Are there any other mistakes people make when they come across wildlife?
Yes. So a lot of times people will keep wildlife. They find a baby squirrel in the backyard and it's starving, and they start.
Makes for great YouTube videos.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Nice selfies.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they raise the baby squirrel and they feed it inappropriate diet, and it doesn't fare well for the animals. Also, now if you release that animal, you have a habituated animal that might be approaching your neighbors, and they might not think it's so cute to have this squirrel climbing on them.
Yeah.
Also, what happens to us is we have a lot of people who they find a baby squirrel, they feed it all kinds of junk, or it's injured. Mm-hmm. And then a few weeks later, when it's not doing well, they take it to us. And now we have this squirrel that sometimes is on death's door, sometimes they die, and then, we're to blame. But in fact, if that squirrel would have been brought to us 2 weeks ago because we're licensed rehabilitators, it would have received medical care, proper nutrition. So just all around, it is not good to keep wildlife as pets. Mm-hmm. And also, you might be keeping an endangered species for all you know. Mm-hmm. It is illegal to keep most wildlife in the state of Massachusetts.
Yes. And it is in Texas, too. I think people, they think they're doing it a favor, or like you said, it's cute and I can have this unusual pet. But
right.
I think what we need to do is stop thinking about ourselves and think more about what's the right thing for that animal. And squirrels are not pets, and neither are raccoons or any of the other things that some people try to make into pets.
Exactly. And they need to be with conspecifics. So raising a squirrel on your own, it's going to imprint on you. When they grow up and become territorial, that is no longer a nice pet. And so if it was brought here, it would have other squirrels that it lives with and is released with so that it exhibits appropriate behaviors in the wild. It's so, so important. And there are so many rescue organizations across the U.S. where you can adopt domestic turtles that need homes, or mm-hmm. domestic rabbits that need homes. So there's no excuse for taking wildlife from the wild and keeping it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. It's like, the baby squirrel's all cute, and then it gets to be like a teenage squirrel and hormones kick in, and now the squirrel's got an attitude and it's doing whatever squirrels do that's not appropriate to be in my house or with my kids or whatever it is. Yes. And now I want to toss it out because it's a squirrel. We'll just put it outside, but it has no clue because you've raised it like it's a human, and now you're expecting it to suddenly know how to be a squirrel. You've yet again done it a disservice by doing that.
Yeah, so, I realize it comes from a place of kindness, but it's not the right thing to do.
And if any of you need a pet, I can direct you to an appropriate rescue for the appropriate type of pet that you're looking for. You can find something cuddly that's not supposed to be in the wild. Definitely good advice. So just kind of taking that a step back with the whole concept of living amongst wildlife, that sometimes the calls that we get, and when I used to volunteer at animal control, people don't want that possum in their backyard because it's ugly or it's scary, or they don't want that snake because my kids play out there. And it's like, but it's a rat snake. It's not going to, it's not going to go after your kids. What what advice would you have, or how do you think maybe we can kind of get through to people on that issue so that they realize that you moved here and this is where the wildlife are, and it's not good to just get rid of them and move them somewhere else?
Exactly. Yes, we also get that. And like you said, they were here first. I mean, opossums, they've been around for over 60 million years.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And yes, they're relatively unchanged. They're like,
I was going to say, they couldn't have evolved to look any better.
and to learn how to cross the road, maybe.
Yeah. Well, we have that with armadillos down by us.
Oh, right. I think because we're just evolving too quickly. But I like to remind people, with the human encroachment, animals have no place to go. And so I think of when an animal's crossing the road, are they really crossing the road? They're crossing the forest that used to be there.
Right.
And so
that's a good point.
And every animal has so much value ecologically. Like if we were to remove one creature, that would have a trickle effect on so many others. And so I feel like just teaching people how to coexist, like the opossums in the backyard, I tell people they're nature's cleanup crew. So they're cleaning up like the carcasses and the trash, but also they eat thousands of ticks in a season. So that's beneficial. And how are they harming us? They're passing through your yard and doing their thing.
Yeah.
So they're really not a threat to anyone or anything.
I think people down by us, I think sometimes they get worried about the, burrowing under the house, and is that going to impact my house in some way? Or like I told you before we started recording, one went underneath. I've got video still of it, with it going under there with babies on its back and underneath my deck. But it used to drive my dog crazy, and to go out there and bounce on the deck like he was going to get through the deck to get to them. But it was a little annoying, but it passes. It does pass.
It does pass. And that's a good point, because there are so many ways that you can deter animals. Okay. I mean, if you do have foxes nesting that are thinking about nesting under your deck, we have ways to discourage them. It's things like putting out rags of ammonia, making loud noise, playing radio at, during the day when they're trying to sleep, things like that, to discourage them without harming them. And these things do work, but sometimes they take persistence. And I feel like we as humans, we want
instant solutions for things. Yeah.
Exactly. So some of this stuff takes persistence, but then can have long-term effects, especially exclusion is really important. So now the fox has moved on from under your deck. We need to exclude that area so the fox doesn't think about coming back next season. So, the chicken wire, the concrete, whatever, that's a small investment that will go a long way. And just to circle back, you mentioned relocation.
Yes, because unfortunately, a lot of our animal control, in order to appease the residents, and maybe out of their own, and I don't mean ignorance in an ugly way, but just lack of knowledge on what happens if you just move an animal to another part of town, is that we'll come pick it up, and we take it and we bring it and we release it behind animal control, and it could be a half a mile away. It could be 10 miles away from where it originally came from. Yeah. And people, I think, well, it's the same kind of trees. It's the same kind of plants. It's just, it's a subdivision. It's a subdivision. What difference does it make?
Yeah. It makes a huge difference for that animal. Mm-hmm. We also see this, and in the state of Massachusetts, it's illegal to relocate any animals. So if you are a homeowner and you trap mice on your property, the only place you can release them is back on your property. And so what we see, especially right now, is people, they think they're doing something kind. Mm-hmm. So they think, I didn't kill the animal. I moved it to the next town.
Right.
Well, guess what? Right now, everyone has babies. So if you're trapping that mama raccoon that was in the chimney and moving it to the next state, it probably has babies in the chimney. So abandonment, orphans, we've created orphans. But also, as you mentioned, if you move an adult animal to a new location, this is a territory that is unknown. They don't know the predators. They don't know the foraging. They're in a new territory of another raccoon. The likelihood of survival is low. So actually, it's an incredibly unkind thing to do. Mm-hmm. The best thing to do is the deterrence. Try to encourage them to move on. Place up your exclusion, your barriers, which means capping your chimney after all the raccoons and their kids are out, things like that. And so this bothers us also because we're here for the animals that really need to be here. We are not a repository for...
I'm having flashbacks of companion animal rescue because the parallels are incredible. As far as like those cats you've been feeding that mama cat and you now have the babies, and I'm trying to save the ones that are, stuffed up in a semi that are getting ready to go across the country and die. And I'm not taking the cats you've been feeding, or I don't want to anyway.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
It's so frustrating. Like, we are not a repository for people's problem animals. They need to understand that those animals are important. They're there for a reason, and how to live with them and exclude them from their home or dwellings. Mm-hmm. So challenging. And we as rehabbers, we're required in the state to release animals within 5 miles of where they were found. And we try to release all adult animals right back where they were found because they might have a mate. They know the territory, all the reasons that I expressed.
Yeah. And you had mentioned the predators too. They kind of know who's in the hood, or what kind of animals are here. Whereas if you move, even just with the dogs and cats, it's like, I might know the way that this dog acts or that this dog doesn't bother me in this backyard where I live. But now you've shifted me over here and I go under this fence thinking, I'm going into a safe yard, and it's not as safe as you think. And
exactly.
And I think that's an interesting, or I guess a key point to make for everybody is that in the attempt to do the right thing and relocate the animal, and what we hear a lot is, well, I don't want it to die. I don't want my dog to kill it, or I don't want you to take it and euthanize it. Do you relocate it? And it's like, it's going to be the same end result if you do that. So you either need to decide you're going to put this animal to a death sentence, basically, which may be illegal where you live in a lot of places, or you need to adapt yourself and maybe go through a little bit of inconvenience. It can be a death sentence for sure.
Yeah.
If you move them. You had mentioned some good advice as far as what to do when you find baby animals and not feeding them and things like that. What about just feeding wildlife in general? Because that's another thing I see a lot, whether it's people in our hill country in Texas or, outside. I'm outside of the Houston area. So let's say, anywhere 2 hours outside and beyond, they're going to have a pretty good deer population. And so it's like they're feeding the deer corn, they're feeding the animals this, I'm feeding the ducks bread, some good old Wonder Bread or Mrs. Baird's. We'll get Mrs. Baird's down by us. And it's, they think they're doing the right thing by doing that. Should we be feeding wildlife or should we let nature take its course?
Right. I don't think we should be feeding wildlife other than backyard bird feeders. Right. Which has been shown, if you keep up the sanitization, make sure your bird feeders and your bird baths are clean. We like to think that birds are dependent on our feeders, but they're actually not. They're getting everything they need from the environment, and this is a supplement, which can help them, especially when they're raising babies. Yeah. We get into problems with people feeding mammals, and a lot of mammals are more solitary, and then when you're feeding them, you create these abnormal congregations of animals, which then more potential for spreading disease. Also, mammals become more habituated to people, where now you have situations of foxes approaching children for food and things like that. We have a problem with that here on our outer Cape, where people feed the coyotes. Oh, and wow. Sadly, we've had a few really terrible incidents, resulted in the coyotes being destroyed.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. Now you get bitten or you get scratched or whatever, and now that animal has to sacrifice its life because you couldn't just leave it alone. Leave it alone, people. Leave it alone.
Exactly. And so I think those two incidences were a real wake-up call, I think, for all of the people here. But it's very sad. And we love our coyotes. It's a nature-loving community. But also feeding wildlife, feeding them hot dogs and Wonder Bread is not helping
them.
For
you. It's certainly not good for them. Yeah,
would you feed your kids hot dogs and Wonder Bread all the time? Probably not.
Some of them. Not all the time. Sure, some people do. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist, right? But yeah, that's a good point. It's just not species appropriate. And, we've talked about that on the podcast quite a bit, about even just what's appropriate for our cats and dogs and their own dog food that we're paying $80 a bag for. And now you're going to take some creature you know nothing about and just feed it random stuff. Like I was flipping through TikTok. That's a whole nother thing. Flipping through TikTok the other day. And, on one hand, my first instinct is, oh, look how cute that is. When you've got the lady that's lifting up her kitchen window and the raccoons are out there and they're eating Fruit Loops and marshmallows, and it makes my skin crawl thinking about it now. But it's like, they're super cute. With their little hands and the things that they can do, but you're killing them, I would think, with feeding them that junk. And like you said, I think that's a key point, is that you're encouraging them to congregate. And now you're creating a problem by having so many raccoons in your backyard or coyotes or whatever you're feeding.
Exactly. And that raccoon that's so cute coming through the kitchen window, guess what? When it goes to the neighbor's house, they're going to think it's rabid, it's disease, because that behavior is so inappropriate. So you are not doing these animals. There's no kindness there. I know
that's a good point.
I know we mean well. And that's the other thing, zoonotic diseases. A lot of these animals have diseases that are transmissible to us and to our pets. And so we have to be careful about that.
Can you think of a good juicy one that would scare people into not messing with each other?
Yes.
What can we get that's really gross?
Raccoon roundworm. So this is a parasite that over 70% of raccoons carry. And so honestly, when people think about raccoons, they're always worried about rabies. And I am not. Also on the Cape, we don't have a high prevalence of rabies, which is great. But raccoon roundworm, knowing that over 70% of the population carries that. So when you're handling them, if you're handling them barehanded, you could get the eggs from their feces onto your hands.
And feces.
And raccoon roundworm, by the time you start seeing symptoms, you're dead. So
really, it's not just like regular roundworms. That's bad. It's a completely different thing, like what dogs and cats have.
Right, exactly. It's roundworm, and it travels. It goes through your central nervous system and travels to your brain and causes neurologic symptoms. And I'm not being dramatic. I've seen this in other animals that have been affected with it, and so that's a huge concern. You will never see any of my staff handling a raccoon without gloved hands, and that's also part of the reason we don't rehab raccoons here. We love them, but our facility is small. But also, if you want to care for them, you need proper separate facilities just for them. So everything needs to be separate because of the risk of spreading disease. And I don't want you to be afraid of them and think, oh my God, they're little disease vectors. But this is just part of the reality. They're wild animals, and all animals are going to carry different things, and some things that can impact us and our pets.
Yeah, it's kind of like when people say, when they find kittens, it's like, do they have worms? It's like, yes, they all have worms.
Yes.
I just want you to know they've all got something. So you need to be aware of that when you're picking them up and then sticking your fingers in your mouth or doing something stupid like
Thank
that.
you. Yep.
Like, and I'm notorious. My daughter says I'm just a harbinger of disease spreading. So she does, anytime we get anything new in, she doesn't let me go past the front porch with it until she's tested it for, panleukopenia and everything else. We do a lot of kittens. So don't touch anything. What have you touched? Did you touch this in your car? I'm like, I'm just not good at that. So if I'm not good at that and this is what I do, then most people are probably not very good at it either.
Exactly.
So don't touch them. Leave them alone. So if I do find an animal, and let's say I call the wildlife rehab place and they say, yes, this is a situation where you either need to bring the animal in or we come and get it. The first question I want to ask is, how do you know you're talking to a good place like this? Because at least down by us, there are wildlife centers like 501c3 nonprofit that seem very official, and they are. And then there are individual wildlife rehabbers, and then there could just be Amy Castro, who's a crazy turtle lady like this little guy over here. And I say I'm a turtle rehabber, but I really don't have any identifiable qualifications. And so is that really the best place? So what would you recommend when I'm getting on Google and trying to figure out, who can help me with this critter that I think needs help?
Yes, that's a great question. I think when you're calling, you want to make sure you're speaking with a licensed wildlife rehabilitator for your state.
Okay.
And so, in Texas, I would think that there's a listing. Do you have like a texas.gov state where you can find? And so
I'll put a link for those who are in Texas, if you've got that, and we can put the one for Massachusetts as well. So
that would be wonderful. So those would be people that have the licensure and they're doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And that is a really good point. And so you could always ask over the phone, are you a licensed wildlife rehabilitator? Yeah. And also Googling, spying on their Facebook pages to see what type of work they do and, what their ethics are.
Yeah, that can be very, very telling. We're big about stalking people in our rescues. We stalk potential adopters. We stalk other rescues, because it's like you don't want to refer somebody to another organization and find out that, it's basically a dog hoarder or a cat hoarder instead of an actual rescuer. And you've basically taken the animal from a bad situation to an even worse situation.
Yes.
So you need to do your homework and make sure you're getting a legit organization along the way.
I think it's so important. And they may have a website, so definitely check that out. And you'll know pretty much right away once you see the content the types of content that they post on their social media. Okay. So, but yes, ask if they're a licensed rehabilitator.
Good to know. All right. So what we want to know now is the inside scoop about places like this. So once I bring whatever, my feathered, my scaled, my whatever friend to your front porch and hand it over to you, what happens then?
Okay, so the first thing is my staff examine it and we give it a patient record, just like if a person going into a doctor or hospital, every animal has a record. And so an exam and then initial treatment. We do have the ability to do diagnostics here, like minor blood work. We take x-rays, things like that. So basically animals that come in here, they can stay with us through the entire process of treatment. So diagnosis, treatment to release, unless they need a major surgery. Mm-hmm. We do have a consulting veterinarian. She's wonderful. That's great. She offers pro bono services. But if we have a situation where we need a turtle shell repair where the turtle has to be anesthetized, or say a major surgery with a bird where they need a pin in their wing, then we work with a wildlife veterinarian who is on another part of the Cape at another center. Okay. But other than that, so animals that come in, they will be with us through the whole length of stay. And we have enclosures here that support, we get a lot of birds. So we have
I saw the little birds. They're so cute.
Aren't they beautiful?
Yeah.
Yes, it's baby bird season.
So a lot of them. You guys have a lot of them.
We do, and it will get even busier. Like this is just the tip of the iceberg right now, the start of the season. So I feel good about, we have a large raptor aviary, and it's not just for raptors. We house gulls in there, ducks, not all at the same time, obviously.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But it's one of the largest in the state, and it's 4 rooms actually, 3 inner aviaries, nice. And then the outer aviary forms this shell. So the bird that is in there can fly continuous laps, and to me that's I call it the treadmill. Where we can make birds fly laps, and it gets them more conditioned for being back out into the wild.
Well, that makes sense, because if they're in some kind of a cage or a small enclosure while they're being rehabilitated, and then you're just like, okay, go. Like,
exactly.
Yeah,
they have to be conditioned, and we get a lot of seabirds because here in Cape Cod, on the outer Cape, we're 30 miles out to sea, so we see over 600 aquatic birds a year. And part of their rehab and conditioning process to prepare them for release is they have to be 125% waterproof before they leave, aside from being healed, fat, healthy. So we also have 2 therapy pools, 2 seabird therapy pools.
So how does just a sidebar, but are they just waterproof or not? Do they lose their waterproofing? Do you put something, you like spray them like you spray a windshield? What is that stuff called? Wipe-X, whatever it is. The Rain-X. I that part out, but yeah, how do they explain that to you? It's very interesting.
Sometimes you just ask this. So birds, unfortunately, they're not magically waterproof. It's something they have to work on, and they have a gland on their rump, and they squeeze it with their beak, and then it secretes like fatty acids and lipids, and they wipe it all over their feathers, and so that keeps them waterproof. So that's something they have to work on all the time. When we have birds that are sick or injured and they are not feeling well, so they have stopped the preening process, I usually tell people it's like when I have the flu and I might not get out of bed or shower or comb my hair for 4 days. Same with birds. So what happens is once they've graduated from here with the meds or the therapy, whatever's happening, they start to be able to go into our therapy pools and begin that waterproofing process. And they do that by being in the water. It stimulates them, because they don't want their skin wet.
Right.
And so it stimulates them to start the preening process, and we can heat the pools, which allows them to stay in longer, even if they're not waterproof, because their body temperature won't drop.
Okay.
So it's this whole process, and we love our waterproof birds. There's really no other way, because the pools really, it stimulates that activity.
Interesting.
It's as close to a natural environment as we can give them while they're here. So
that must be why birds are always, because I always see them like fussing with themselves, and it's like, you look good to me, man. I'm still trying to floof your floof and do your thing there.
Always fussing with themselves.
Can I interrupt you 1 second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you explain in the pool? I think it's so cool how the oil skims off.
Yes. So in the pool, the seabirds especially, they're pooping out fishy, oily poop. And so in our pools, we have like this overflow slot where the water is constantly running, and it takes the surface oils off all the time.
Oh, wow.
And then that's recycled. It goes through a bunch of filters, including a UV filter to kill bacteria, and a filter that takes out ammonia.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a recycled system. And there's also a current. So we can adjust the current and have to swim against it.
Oh, wow.
So it's really, they're amazing. The pools are my
I need
most
that in my pool. I get some exercise.
So just getting them conditioned, because we can't release a water bird, especially a deep sea bird, offshore seabird. We can't release them back into the wild if they're not waterproof. They will just beach themselves. They will become obsessed with preening their feathers. They'll get waterlogged, they get cold, and they will beach like as soon as we put them out there. So it's really important.
That's a process I would take, So how long would something like that take, coming in from a sick animal that's not grooming itself, and is not waterproof to waterproof? Just ballpark. I'm just curious.
It can take like a week in some cases. And some birds, we just have a real challenge where they're not inspired to preen. So for some birds, it can take weeks, but usually less than a week. It's great to see.
Interesting. I want to put a plug in here because you mentioned the veterinarian doing things for pro bono, and some do it pro bono, some do it for a reduced fee, whether it's wildlife rescue or companion animal rescue, which is what I do. But I would like to put a plug out there for folks to support those veterinarians, because every hour they're spending working on some cat that I bring in, or a bird or a duck or a turtle or whatever that you bring in to your veterinarian, is hours they could be making a lot more money. And so, it's they're sacrificing in order to do what they think is right. And so we need to definitely support them for sure in that process. So support your vets. Find out if your vet works with rescue. That's my new question now.
Yeah.
Along the way. And along that same note, how do you pay for all of this?
Great question.
You're talking about all this fancy equipment you've got here, or not fancy, but like, I'm sure it's expensive. X-ray machines, fancy swimming pools.
Exactly. So we are a nonprofit organization. Mm-hmm. And so most of the funds are donations from the public. We do receive some grants every year, but we do not receive federal, state, or municipal funding. So I have to be a fundraising machine.
Yes, I feel your pain on that, Brent.
And thank God, this is a nature-loving community. And many of our biggest donors are second homeowners, which is interesting to me and shows me how much we do engage the public. I feel really good about that.
So they have a vacation home here, they live elsewhere, and it'd be like, well, I only go there for 2 months in the summer, so what do I care? But they really do.
Yeah,
that's great.
So that makes me feel really good because we're a tourist-driven community. And so we have events throughout the year. And if you follow our Facebook page, which is Wild Care Cape Cod, you will see that I ask for a lot of things.
I do. I was simply begging for something.
And sometimes I feel bad about that. And sometimes I even state, I know we're always asking for things, but that's because the need is always there. Yeah. I mean, it never ends.
Yeah.
It gets a little slower in the winter.
Yeah.
Because there aren't as many people here, first of all. So not as many wildlife impacts. But also we have birds that have migrated and we don't have babies. But I'm always asking for something.
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting you say that, because for our, again, companion animal rescue, I will constantly want to put stuff out, and board members and others that are volunteers, it's like, we were just asking for this yesterday. And it's like, so what's your point? Because my feeling is that, it's, there are some people that are going to give no matter what, whether it's $5 or they're going to put $100 or whatever it is. But then there's also, you never know what's going to touch somebody's heart. Is it the turtle? Like I love turtles. So, is it the turtles, or is it the birds, or is it whatever other critter that you brought in, that story or that species just really moves them, and so they're going to be willing to do that. Or hey, I see the value in getting this equipment, so I want to donate towards that. So for any people who are out there involved in rescue, if they don't want to give, they won't. So it doesn't hurt to ask. I think the key to that, though, too, is to show people where that money is going. Show them the outcome of, look, because we had this, look at the things that we've been able to do, so that they see that it's money well spent, which it obviously is here for sure.
Thank you.
So any other advice or things that we missed that either of you can think about?
Baby opossums. Mm-hmm. So they stay on mom's back for over 6 weeks once they leave the pouch. And there are a lot of cases where people will call us and will say, can you keep that baby warm and leave it there and see if mom retrieves it? With opossums, we're not going to do that.
Okay.
Because they do not come back for their babies. So if you
hang on, or you're left behind.
Exactly. So if you find a baby and it's less than 6 inches from head to tail, or if you find a baby and it's just like not trying to run away from you, or just hissing, or something seems wrong, we're probably going to have you bring that baby in.
Okay.
And what happens is mom's got all these kids on her back, and she goes under a porch and a couple of them scrape off, and then she ain't coming back for them.
Where's Earl?
Exactly.
He's no longer back there.
So because there's such a prey animal, she has to be on the move.
Yeah.
And we do get cases also where dogs will grab the mother and shake her, and babies will fall out of her pouch. And then she is gone. So people bring us the baby. So just know that, like, mom ain't coming back. Sorry.
So that's good to know. Because it seems like the advice for so many other critters is mom is around, mom's watching, mom's going to be back, at some point. But that's good to know. Because like I said, for us, a lot of opossums. And we call them possums. We leave the O off because it's Texas. But
I love it.
So I want to hear some stories. Share with us a story or two, whether it's, I don't care if it's a favorite story or a triumphant story, or what jumps out to you as a memorable story.
Okay, so I have a story just from yesterday.
Oh, wow.
So we have a huge osprey population here. They are fish hawks, and we have a population of we believe over 500 nests just on Cape Cod.
Oh, wow.
But USDA contacted me because in the town of Falmouth, someone came to their second home and found osprey nesting on their chimney, and they didn't want them there. And so it's illegal to remove a bird nest once there are eggs or chicks in it. So USDA was contacted, permits, USDA removed the nest, and this nest had 3 eggs. And they asked me if I would hatch the eggs and place the chicks into foster nests, wild foster nests.
Oh, wow.
And so I love eggs, but I had never incubated raptor eggs before. Osprey, they're a type of hawk. And so the eggs all hatched. The first chick unfortunately died, but the other 2 grew up. And yesterday, after scouting a whole bunch of nests really safely via drone, we found a good match of a nest in a nearby town with 2 chicks in the nest that were similarly aged. Mm-hmm. And the mom had lost, 1 chick had died. So I thought this is a great nest for me to put my 2 chicks in, which are now, as of yesterday, they were 9 days old and 7 days old. Mm-hmm. So with the help of the fire department, a volunteer, it takes a village. With their bucket truck, we got up into this nest and placed my 2 chicks. And the mom, osprey can't count. Okay, so you can give them more kids and they will take care of them. So she came back to the nest probably in less than 5 minutes. She was with them. Oh, wow. And I got a report last night that she was on the nest on all of them as of 6 p.m., which is great because last night we had this terrible torrential rain. And I
got to experience.
Was really worried about the chicks, but I know she had been on the nest, so that's good. So that was just that has made the news.
Oh wow!
It's just such a good story to give a second chance to these chicks, and I've known them since they were eggs, so it was really hard to. So it was hard for me, sort of bittersweet. Yeah. And I have 2 more. Another nest came from another town from USDA, chimney nest, and so they are today 6 days old.
Oh, wow.
And I'm seeking a wild foster nest for them. So these are the things that it's so much effort and takes a lot of players, but it's so worth it.
Yeah. And that's such a good point, is that people, I think, oftentimes don't realize what goes into things behind the scenes, whether it's, wildlife or companion animals. And it's, they're seeking help for something, but, sometimes depending upon the group or depending upon the issue that you're facing, we may not have the equipment or we may not have the resources to do it. And we need you to step in and kind of do your part in this process. Yes. And other times, you've got good relationships in the community and you can call on people like the fire department to go help you with the birds. So yeah, I'm just trying to imagine this scenario. So you've got these baby birds and you reach out to people that have osprey nests, and then you send the drone to scout out how many babies are in that nest, and how does that process work?
Yes. So, the nests are huge, so they're very visible, mm-hmm. and everyone loves their osprey nests. So we're already aware of many nests, okay. But then there's Cape Cod Osprey Watch of a team of people who monitor over 170 nests.
Oh, wow.
So just lots of resources of people who are looking at osprey nests. The dilemma is that the nests are so high.
I was going to say, I remember seeing them up on these huge poles, and it's how do you even get those babies up there?
I know. So you need a bucket truck or a ladder truck from the fire department. And then droning, it's not something I feel entirely comfortable with, but we are using drone safe guidelines for osprey. I've let Mass Wildlife know that we're doing this. And the person who's droning is so conscientious. I mean, he will not.
You don't want to buzz the nest and scare babies or scare moms away or something like that.
No one can leave. If someone leaves the nest, you're doing something wrong. Mm. And so he makes sure, and in the photos, he sends me a photo, and mom isn't even looking up. So this is from a distance.
Pretty good height.
And anytime if the male comes in with a fish, my volunteer pulls out. We don't want to cause any disturbance to these. I mean, I've already caused disturbance. She went to the grocery store and she came back and she had 2 more kids.
Yeah.
So we don't want to cause any more disturbance than we have to. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And a lot of things can go wrong.
Yeah.
So I feel grateful for this. Worked out really well.
Yeah. So why do you do it?
I think for this, but also it's become more for me. I love the releases, but I have come to realize that I have a voice within the community. So if I teach people how to treat wildlife kindly and how we can all coexist, people are listening. Mm-hmm. And that feels really good. I think that's really why I'm doing it now, is to make a difference, to educate people. And more often than not, people just don't know that they're doing something wrong.
Right.
And
it's not out of malice or anything necessarily like that. It's just a lack of knowledge and lack of knowing the impact of what you're doing, I think, is huge.
Exactly. Like a few weeks ago, I was asked to come to the local high school to speak to their green club, their environmental club, about rodenticides, the mouse and rat poisons. And oh my goodness, I mean, the faces in the room, and it was just like this connection, this awareness. And now we have 30 kids who are going to go home and tell their parents, like,
we can't do that anymore.
Exactly. We can't do that. And here are the options. And so I love that we're respected in the community and people are listening. So I feel like I can really make a difference.
Yeah.
And we are making a difference.
Well, and the education, I know for us that's why we do this podcast. I mean, the whole thing is about education, and that's part of our mission, because, the education feeds so much into prevention of some of the problems that we have with animals, regardless of what kind that they are. So I really appreciate everything that you do. Thank you so much. I know you're a busy lady. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. And for all of you who are listening, we're going to put up in the show notes, we're going to put a link to Wildcare Cape Cod's website if you're looking for a wildlife organization to support philanthropically.
Thanks.
Send a few bucks their way, maybe more along the way, because you've heard about all the great work that they do. And we'll also put some of the other links that we talked about during the show. And please share this with other people, because I think, despite the fact that I feel like sometimes there's so much information on the internet for people as to what to do if kind of thing, but they may not know who to believe. So this is the lady to believe. And so make sure that you share this video and or share the podcast, if you're listening to the audio, with your friends and family, so that they can do the right thing by our wild friends and everybody can live together in a peaceful and harmonious way. So thank you all so much for listening to Starlight Pet Talk this week. And as we say every single week, if you don't do anything else, give your pets a hug from us.
You've been listening to the Starlight Pet Talk podcast. We're glad you joined us to gain new insight on the many loving ways to adopt and care for your pets. Be sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And if you want more information, go to starlightpettalk.com, because your pet can't talk. Be sure to join us next time for Starlight Pet Talk.